All right, welcome to Thin Vertical Slices. By the end of this lesson, I hope that each and every one of you will be able to describe what goes into making a thin vertical slice of an app. Oh, we got some people showing up. Hey, Sydney. Hey, Rodney.
Hey.
Sorry I'm late.
You all good? So, to start with, let's take it out of software. If we were, what we're ultimately talking about is done. What done is. And predictive project management usually has us talking about this in like percentages. Halfway done, 80% done, 85% done, almost done. So we're going to change what done means to a binary. It's either done or it's not. There's really no in between. There's so much squishiness in things that can sneak into little cracks of those things that's not useful to try to quantify them. So he said that something's either done or it's not done. Not done except for this, because when you start doing that except for that thing, sometimes you uncover a whole bunch of other things. So we only talk about all the way done. So if we're talking about all the way done, then we need to have a definition of what that is. So in the Agile world, we call this definition of done. I didn't make that up. You can see that phrasing all over the place. Definition of done. So let's move out of software for a second and think about what definition of done for a meal would be. So everything that goes into getting a meal together and being done with it. So I want you to think about that to yourself a couple minutes. What would it mean to be all the way done with a meal that you make? Think to yourself for a second. Welcome, Tiffany. We're thinking about what would it mean to be done with a meal that you make? What goes into being done?
Okay.
Let's take another minute. All right, let's talk about it. Welcome, Katie. All right, so you're making a meal what are some things that would have to be accomplished for us to be done? JR. Unmute.
Well, the food needs to be ready. Like you have to be done cooking.
Food needs to be cooked. Cool. Paige, give me another one.
The table is set.
Table needs to be set. Cool. Music, give me another one.
Like you need to inform the people who are eating with you.
Ah. Let's see. B-Rad, give me another one.
Ultimately, you have to be satisfied with the results of what you're producing. So when you feel that's satisfied.
Cool. John, can you give me another one? Unmute.
Properly spiced.
Hey. Rodney, give me another one.
The presentation.
Okay. Sydney, give me another one.
A meal can't be done if it's not consumed, so actually eating the meal.
Good. Very nice. Tiffany, give me another one.
Has the food already been bought?
Nope. Katie, hopefully you're getting the gist of this. Anything else that would go into being done with a meal?
I can't think of anything else.
All right. Free for all. Anybody think of some other things that would go into being done with a meal?
Have to
Wash
cut the
dishes.
food, right?
What else?
Washing dishes.
Yes, that's one I was looking for.
Great minds think alike music.
Anything else?
Get drinks, I guess.
Sure. Anything else that goes into being done with a meal?
I think at the very beginning, even knowing the recipe to even make a meal.
Yeah. Getting the recipe, even making the decision, coming up with your own. Yeah. So, being done with the meal isn't being finished cooking. It's not having consumed the food. We even have some stuff we have to do beforehand. We have some stuff we have to do afterward.
Drive to the
Yep,
store.
done. Go ahead.
Drive to the store.
Yep. All of these things are part of being done with the meal. If we didn't do all those things, we're not done. We have a work in progress. And those of you who went to the Kanban lesson, we don't like work in progress. Work in progress is inventory. And we see this in houses all the time where, no, we're done eating. This is over there. We'll get to them later. That's WIP. So if I were to like come up with an abstract definition of done, I would probably say something along the lines of, plug in my tablet. You return to where you started having changed. Tummies are full. We have a new feature. We deleted a feature. But otherwise, the app's in the same state. We have finished documentation. We have tests. We have our code is cleaned up. All that's different is we have the thing that we were trying to do. That's done. But that's it for a sec. So let's pivot the conversation a little bit. Who gives a shit? What are the upsides of being done?
You don't have to fuck with it anymore.
Yep. Which, like, what's the benefit of that?
Free up time.
So you can do something else. It's not eating up, it's not, you're not in debt for your time in the future. It's freedom. What else?
You won't have forgotten things if you have to revisit it.
Yep. All those context changes, in this context, to this context, to this context, you leave stuff out. Why else do we like being done?
I'll add another. The sense of accomplishment and fulfillment that you get from creating something.
It feels good to be done. I think Paige mentioned in Stand Down yesterday, you can work all day and then you go, what did I actually accomplish? Well, if you're actually finishing things, you can go, oh, you know what? I didn't get everything that I wanted done, but I got this and this and this. That feels a lot better than, I know I worked really hard. I don't have anything new to show for it. From a purely psychological standpoint, there's a mile of difference between those two things. What else? What else do we like being done?
I know that when I'm done with a feature, when I start on a new one, I can't fuck up that one.
Yeah. If it's done, it can't be broken. There's risk that you carry with work in progress. If the work is no longer in progress, you don't have that risk. Why else do we care? Think collaborators. So you got a kitchen you share with a few people.
If you're not done with that feature, then the next person can't work on the next feature.
There we go. So enables other people to do their work. Because if you have some work in progress and somebody else depends on your work, might also need to do some stuff that you're working on. You leave a mess for them? That's not polite. Don't put your dishes away? I needed that utensil, man. Or I started prep on this one thing. I didn't realize that you were going to use the pot, man. Well, this is a fucking waste. That happens all the time in software. Anything else you can think of? Why we like being done? This one's highly relevant to people, students in like projects with fixed durations, capstones especially.
You don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, well, you can quit whenever you want. If you have a done project, even if it could have more features, like to have more features, if it's done, you always have the option of going, throwing in the towel, calling this good. If you have a bunch of work in progress, you don't have that option. Every time we make a feature, everything that goes into making that feature done is complete before we do the next feature. And then at some point, we run out of time. I go, I was halfway through this, fuck it. I'll just throw it away. Roll back to my last commit. You've got a complete project. It's another like psychological one. It's kind of related to this. If you have the option of not writing your documentation or your tests or whatever else, you probably won't. If all of that is part of getting something done, you probably will. And then there's no chores. Like, since I started like getting thin vertical slices in my soul, software development became so much more interesting because whenever I wanted to add a feature to something, I didn't have to also go, all right, well, I got to clean up all my shit from last time before I can get started. And so then you don't, and so then the feature never gets added. That's nice.
How long into your programming career did you discover that thin vertical slices are amazing?
That's not important. It took a long time. Probably a better part of like a little over half a decade.
And what inspired the change?
This has always been a part of Agile. Like going back a long ways, even to things that were inspirations for Agile. So like the Toyota production system, the big thing that Toyota did differently is, so Ford invented the assembly line. So we make all of these things and then all of these things and then all of these things, and then we assemble them all together. The radical thing in Japanese manufacturing was we make one car at a time, one complete car, and then another one, and then another one, and then another one. And they got laughed at. How could you do so wasteful? You'll never be able to keep up with these. Oh, wait a minute. If we had a defective like batch of car bodies, then we just wasted all of those materials building that. Uh-oh. Also, it made it so that Ford could only make one fucking kind of car. That like you can have the car in any color you want as long as it's black. Well, if you're only making one car at a time, you can make a lot of different kinds of cars. And that's exactly what Japanese auto manufacturing did. By the time the 80s came around, America auto manufacturing couldn't keep up anymore. Quality was so high that they could work with way lower margins, and they could have way more models than something that relied on large batch manufacturing. Car's done, it's done. So overall, I'd say being done leads to less waste. Think about the food prep thing. Oh man, I was starting to prep this thing, and then I found out, oh, man, so you're doing this other thing, this stuff's gonna go bad then. We have that in software also. All right, so let's talk now about what kinds of things would make something done in software. So I'm going to give you a little bit of time on this one. I want you to slack me your answer for this one. So write it out. But think about what kinds of things lead to a feature or piece of software being done. Go. Let's take 5 minutes on this one.
Kyle, can you repeat your question, please?
Yes. What goes into a piece of software being done? So we're getting software specific now. All right, if you've got, if you're still working on yours, send it over. A pretty decent list going here. All right. So lots of good answers. Lots of answers that are probably going to be different by the end of this. Katie, you had a pretty good start. Would you please share your answer?
Like the whole thing.
Oh,
Okay. So signed off by QA, unit test done, regression tested, requirements of the feature are met, code reviewed, CI/CD deployment successful, and then if it's front end, also checked for accessibility and tested in multiple browsers.
mwah, love it. So let's start building out a total list. That's a good start. Thank you for sharing, Katie. Some things we think about when considering whether or not something is done. That it is documented. In our case, did you update your README? You know, like this is that stuff you do right before presentations on Friday. You go, oh yeah, I gotta get my README together. What if you were working on that the entire time? What if it wasn't a chore? Any front end work needed for a feature, done. Any back end work needed for a feature, done. Any new database migrations needed for this feature. If you need to update your seeds. Styled. If it's not styled, it's not done. This is like the presentation of the, it's the plating of it. If that's not done, you didn't finish it. Tested, and that could be at a lot of different levels. I really like that. A lot of you picked up on that, like, we need to know that this didn't break any other stuff. And Katie's answer, she's talking about regression testing, which is like the specific way that we do that. So we talk about unit testing, talk about integration testing, we talk about end-to-end testing. We also talk about regression. That's so we have these tests that show that the app worked before. If they all still work after we add this new feature, that's our regression test. Sure that our app didn't regress. Someone picked up that you gotta have a concept of the feature. You also have to have a design for it. That's different than styled. You need to know what is it supposed to look like and how is it supposed to work. I saw one on usability. Some of that's part of the design, some of that's part of the implementation, but can actual people use this feature correctly? Is it intuitive? That's part of done also. And if we say, let's see, accessibility was in Katie's answer. Does it pass accessibility? And like by passing accessibility, let's get more specific. Does it pass WCAG? Does it pass Section 509? Like there's different accessibility standards and there's different levels of conformance to those. What are you targeting? Deployed. That's part of like somebody being able to use your app. If it's not deployed, it's hard to say that it's done. Like that, Katie had passes CI. So CI is continuous integration. You made your change. Does it fit in with the rest of the code? Does it work in all the browsers that you're planning on supporting? How do you know? Did somebody else look at your code? That's just some. We could have more than this. So what this means for us is we go, all right, well, I'm getting a list of things to show up on a page. Easy. Even when it is, it's not just iterating over an array, making some DOM elements and slapping them on the page. That's part of the work. All of the rest of this is also part of that work. So every new feature you do should be able to tick all the boxes that you're targeting for your project. But if we do all these things for every feature that we have, then after every feature, we return right back to where we started. But now we have whatever the thing is. And I mentioned it might be adding a feature. It might be removing a feature too. Could be revising something, whatever it needs to be, whatever change you're making to your code, you come back home having changed. But the dishes are clean, they're put away, everybody's tummies are full, smiling faces. In software, it looks like this. One more I'll add in here. Easy one to miss. Refactored. Getting the test to pass, getting your feature to do the thing that you want it to do, that's the beginning of that. Then you want to make it good. That's the one I see students just phew, fly past. You're so high because you finally got the fucking thing to work. Yeah. I was like, okay, can you clean up that code a little bit? You go, nah, fuck it, on to the next feature. And then it's really hard to do the next feature because you've got tools sitting all out in your shop. You got this spaghetti code everywhere. You can't reuse anything. That's a problem. So at the end of project week, when your app looks like Jenga, that's why. You ran out of dishes, you ran out of utensils. So you started using things that you shouldn't have used for that. Didn't like the results you got.
One of my questions is, I'm trying to think about how to grapple with this problem that I have, which is that I see 20 things listed there. That's an estimation. It's probably less than 20, but whatever it is, there's all those things listed there. And of those, I know how to do some of them. I don't actually know how to do end-to-end testing. I certainly don't know regression testing.
Sure.
I don't know really how to do anything with CI. So if I'm trying to work on a thin vertical slice on an app that I'm making, right? I can't really run through this thing like a checklist.
Sure.
And be efficient. What is like is there like a correct approach to like incorporating things that you don't know into thin vertical slices? And do you sort of break that out into its own thin vertical slice sometimes? Like, oh, my thin vertical slice is today, I'm going to figure out how to write the end-to-end testing for this other thin vertical slice that I have. I don't know if I did a good job of phrasing that question.
No,
But
I
I guess
get where you're going with it. This is a potential list. Mine's probably even longer than this. The important thing is that it's part of the definition of done for your project. It doesn't need to be the same on every project. Even things like accessibility, single A WCAG, triple A WCAG, 509, like which is it? So what you want to do is just be explicit about what done means and take some of this kind of stuff into account. So you don't know how to do accessibility testing or CI. Maybe it's not part of done for like your mod 3 project. Super doesn't need to be. I know like deployment is like pretty new or non-existent for a lot of us. Cool. So then deployed isn't part of your goal for this project. It's not part of the definition of done. But even still, you could say, all right, did I get somebody else to look at this before I called it good? All of you know how to clean up your code, at least a little bit. Cool, you made a new feature. Did you try to get somebody else to use it before you just danced away from it and lost all your context? All of you can do that. So you might not know how to do automated testing. You always test your, oh, you should. I've seen a lot of code challenges like, I've never run this code before, but I think it works. So even if it's manual, did you write out all of the things that would be the case if it works? And did you do all those? If you're planning on supporting multiple browsers, did you do it in all the browsers you plan on supporting? All of you can do some design and some styling. You might not be great at it, but what I see way more often is I'm just getting it to work right now. I'll do the looks later, which is super not what like designer styling is, because it also plays into usability. And anybody who's done that before has probably found that it's really hard to start slapping some styles on something on Friday morning and expect anything worthwhile. Imagine that every time you make a feature, it's the last feature of the app. So you're not anticipating something that you're doing next, making space for something. Let's assume this is all it does. All it does is list the Pokemon. Make that look great. I promise it'll be a lot easier to incorporate whatever your next feature is if you're doing that every time. Database migrations and seeds. What I see way more often is people doing all the planning up front. And they do all their schema, and they make one migration that has everything in it and one group of seeds, and then hope that that works for everything that they find out, every new feature they do. New feature, make new migrations. Update your seeds. Do it then. It's fine. I got my API working. So like you can do these things even if you don't have every single one of these skills right now. Everybody can write a README. Part of multi-browser would be like, all right, is it supposed to be responsive? Have you tried running it on a phone? If you're running light server or something, check this out. If I go to, if I like light server this folder, this external, you can just punch that into your phone in your like browser. Like that's a URL basically. You just put that into your phone, use your app on your phone. As long as your phone and your computer are on the same Wi-Fi network. So if you're trying to make it mobile friendly, did you try using it on a phone? It's another one that's hard to slap on like Friday morning, but if it's part of your goals the entire time, easier to do that incrementally. What else?
So your definition of done is basically you decide. The point is that you go through the exercise of deciding up front and then actually doing it
Yes.
for each feature. And
here's
that might be restricted by your capacity, timeline,
Totally.
skills,
Absolutely.
but that's okay.
Yes. You'll know that you did this right if every feature is self-contained. Whatever it is. You'll know you did this wrong if you have a little bit here and it kind of bleeds into this one, and this one is kind of in the latter half of that. And then there's a bunch of cleanup work at the end. That's not thin vertical slices. Even if it's never deployed, never tested, whatever else, are there no chores left over when that feature is done? And can you clearly delineate when one feature is done and another feature begins? And after every one of those has something useful been accomplished? Ask me some more questions about this.
So far we've talked about thin vertical slices, and it's really only applied to like building a full stack app.
Mhm.
Can you take the thin vertical slice mindset and apply it to more general things? Like, how do I learn? Like, specifically, how do you like learn stuff? Can you take the same concept and apply it to like learning? And if so, what would change at all?
Oh, you mean like cooking a meal? So thin vertical slice in learning something might be something like identifying what the thing you're trying to learn is, figuring out what the definition of done for learning that is, and then try to work in small pieces for that. So, for example, let's say you want to be a full stack web developer. Well, that's huge. So how do you break that down? Well, you could find some smaller skills within those, and then you could say, all right, well, first thing I'm going to do is go through this lab. I'm going to read the shit. I'm going to do the work. I'm going to get all the tests to pass. And then I'm going to do this one. And then I'm going to do this one. And then I'm going to do this one. So the non-thin vertical slice would be to be doing a little bit of all this kind of all the time. And I'm like in between like 12 different labs right now. I'm also reading a book. That's not thin vertical slices. And I like these ones in particular, I specifically decomposed the program this way because each one of these things is independently useful. There's like an argument in Flatiron Land right now about like whether or not seeding data is a standard, to which I said, absolutely not. I've never in my life heard an employer go like, oh, we're looking for applicants who can seed data. That's not a thing people say. Modeling domains, yep, that one all by itself has some value. So that's how you want to split up learning things. Two more that would go into like the kitchen. Put stuff away. Clean surfaces. One of the things you figure out real quick when you start doing this is, oh, everything takes way longer when I take into account all of the work that goes into it. But here's the thing. That was always the case. That's why you get projects that are like, oh, we're 80% done. And then they stay 80% done and don't move for months. Because nobody took into account all of these other things. if you're doing all that stuff as you go, it also unlocks the ability to correctly estimate your work. Weird. Ask some more questions.
So on like the planning phase, how much do you put, like thinking this in like, I guess like a Kanban board, how much would you put in the backlog? Like all that you're considering doing and then move it to like what you're working on, like each slice as you're working on it. And like, if you get to that, the rest of them in the backlog, cool. If not, oh well. Or
So, yes. Finish your thought.
Oh, that's pretty much it.
Okay. So, yes, although you said a word that I also saw in a couple of your answers to the last question that we should talk about. Phase. In agile development, we are trying to have phaseless development. So there isn't a planning phase per se. And likewise, within a vertical slice, we do all these things. We don't necessarily do them in any particular order. Within a thin vertical slice, these things can feed back to each other and should. You probably write your test first, or you should, in like pure TDD. All right, well then there's no testing phase that comes later. Sometimes in the course of writing your test, you go, oh man, we didn't really understand this one requirement for this. So we should reevaluate that. Or maybe as you start styling something, you realize something else that it should probably do. And so that feeds back into something else. All of that is okay. In fact, we want it. We want that kind of tight feedback and chaos within the slice. We just don't want them to bleed into each other. Now, like, more to your question when you're talking about backlogs and stuff. When something's in a backlog, we want to stay pretty vague about what it is. Like, backlog items are mostly ideas. It might also be bugs. You can do some dreaming and throw things in the backlog based on that. But figuring out like how big they are, what we need to pull them off, how long it's going to take, like all of that kind of stuff, that gets done closer to when it's actually being worked on. And the reason for that is, let's say we have a backlog that looks like, I got that and that. This is the backlog. Like, all right, I'm taking the most important thing off, and I'm going to refine this one and figure out some ins and outs on it. I'm going to have a lot of conversations around this, kind of figure out what do we need to change in the schema? What doors does working on this thing close? That's when that conversation happens. And then we do another one. And these things happen in time. And so like, whatever, this has been a week that we've worked on this. And all of a sudden we go, oh, dag, a completely different direction. We learned something from doing this that's going to help us go in a way more productive direction. So I'm glad we didn't waste any time figuring out those ones. And actually, this one's way more important to do. We want to enable that. That's a good thing. That's not a thing we're trying to prevent. I once heard the metaphor for like this kind of planning or like requirements gathering or something, rather than thinking of it as like making a contract. We were trying to get everything and just nail it down. You're thinking of it as trawling like a lake or a river or something with increasingly fine-grained nets. You want to catch the really big stuff on the first pass, and then on subsequent passes, you want to get increasingly more detailed things. And it's only when you're actually working on something that you want to like bring the mesh through. That's a way healthier way to think about agile requirements. Ask me more questions. So something, last thing I want to talk about with this is size of a thin vertical slice. How thin are we talking? That. Because a lot of this stuff gets way less reasonable if we have too fat a slice. So some things that I would, like on almost any app that I work on, the very first thing that I do, my first thin vertical slice, is splash page. This is a simple page that says something like, app coming soon, email us for more. I just did one of these last week. So fucking much work goes into getting that up. Like in that case in particular, I also had to like make the email address. It's not unstyled, so you need to do some design systems work. You need to do some color selection. You got to decide a type scale. You got to pick a typeface. Even a simple thing has like a layout to it. It needs to work on mobile. I didn't need a back end for it at all. Still need a front end. So I need to have like pipelines and stuff for that figured out. In this case, I was doing CI/CD. So I need to set up those CI/CD pipelines. Need to set up a deployment target. Need to get the shell scripts for like actually pushing that stuff up done. Need to configure the CI/CD server. There's like a lot that goes into just getting something to show up on a page. And one of the reasons I do it is deploying effectively nothing does all of that work. And now it doesn't need to be done on subsequent features. So another one that I'll do like pretty early on is usually like list something. Shows a list of static Pokemon. And some of those things too, depending on where the app is going, you might not even need a backend for it. Maybe you just hard code the things. But a lot of the times this ends up doing a similar thing that the splash page does to a backend. Because in making this work, you end up making a backend and a database, being able to accept HTTP requests, that kind of stuff. Some other things. Login is not a feature. It's one of the reasons that like we don't demo it in capstone presentations. Have you ever like used a product where they advertise and you can log into the app? All I've ever wanted to do is log into something. I get to come up with my own password. Like that's not exciting. You end up doing that as a byproduct of some other feature. And that's usually like, all right, now that I'm listing something, I might need to restrict listing other things, or maybe some of these things. And so getting these to show up to everybody is one feature. Getting them to only show up to some people, different feature. That ends up doing your auth process. A contact form. That's a feature. A new page. It's usually a feature. And like the new page might even be what we call an epic, which is a feature that needs to be split into smaller features. Now we're adding a page, and this thing displays something static, displays something dynamic, like any interaction, it's probably a separate feature. So maybe you have things showing up. I heard somebody talking about drag and drop today. So like, all right, can I do it with boxes where you just go, all right, send 1 to 2, like here, this is how we're doing it on the Firebase site. On this very one, if I want to reorder these, I can do that here. It would be nicer if instead of reordering this standard this way, if I could like drag it below this one or something. All right, that's a separate feature. And I can make that feature smaller by finding another complete way to do it that doesn't have the cool interaction. So now you've split that into 2 different features, which makes them a lot thinner, which makes them a lot easier to do. Ultimately, you're trying to do something useful for a user every single time, but the very fucking smallest version of that you can. My Agile coach, Richard Lawrence, wrote a popular and awesome doc called How to Split a User Story. Agile for All's his company. So these are some different patterns for how you try to make something smaller. So like defer performance is, can you get it working? And then separate out, can you get it working quickly? 2 different features. Business rule variations, that's things like, all right, we take a bunch of different credit cards. What if it's only Visa, and then as a second story, accept other cards too? So I've taken this fat story, made it a little bit smaller, more manageable. Because once you've done one of them, doing more of them is a lot easier. Other questions about old thin vertical slices? All right, last thing before I slide out to whatever the next lesson is. I said by the end of this lesson, I wanted each and every one of you to be able to explain thin vertical slices, describe what these things are. So let's take a couple minutes to do that. Slack me your description of what a thin vertical slice is. Go. The new friends are called illicit syntax. Pretty good cohort name.
I was tied between that one and abstract methods. Both seems pretty cool.
Both of those sound like band names to me.
Well, I think everyone in that cohort's super like music oriented anyways.
Basically.
Good job, B-Rad. All right, start wrapping up your answers, send them over. Paige, your answer was stellar. Would you mind sharing it, please?
Yeah. A thin vertical slice is a finished feature defined by the project's definition of done. The definition of done is defined at the start of a project, and a feature is complete when it meets those requirements. A definition of done might be determined by skill set, timeline, and/or capacity.
Beautiful. Outstanding answer. For people who are in the Scrum lesson, any guesses who determines whether or not something has met the definition of done?
Scrum Master. Wait, no. That's project owner. Product
Almost.
owner? Product owner?
Product owner. Product owner is the person who determines whether or not something has met the definition of done. It's one of their primary responsibilities. Is you as a development team member are submitting your work. Your PO is responsible for going down your DOD and going like, yep, sounds good to me. Especially when there's like interpretive parts of it, like that's their choice. Cool, very nice. So hopefully this is useful to you in your projects next week. It takes practice, but the biggest thing you're likely to mess up is making your slices too fat. And always remember, you know you're doing this right if there aren't a bunch of chores at the end. It can be chaotic within this, but they should otherwise stay pretty isolated. If they run into each other, or you got extra work you have to do at the end of the project, the slices were not so vertical. Cool. Hopefully I'll see some of you in Talking Code. Awesome. See you over there. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks.